I was totally in love with this man.
Everybody knows the good secretary has access to all of those materials that her boss possesses.
I can't think of a service that I considered more of a threat to us. Their discipline was better than the KGB's.
I was blinded by love, yes. You're blinded, point, period.
During the Cold War, one of the world's most effective and repressive intelligence and secret police agencies is the Stasi.
The Stasi, or the Ministry for State Security, was the East German intelligence service. I rank them as probably the most disciplined, most professional, most dangerous intelligence service we faced. They had virtually unlimited resources.
To succeed, the Stasi spies on its own population, as well as the enemies on the other side of the Berlin Wall. Among many creative espionage tactics is a calculated and ingenious method for recruiting women with access to secrets. He called it the Romeo Project.
When I met Frank, that was 7 July 1977. I was sitting there at this restaurant and waiting for this other person. Frank approached me and told me that the other person couldn't come because he was ill. But I didn't listen to the words anymore. I was so fascinated by him. I don't have a photo of him, unfortunately, but he looked like Rutger Hauer. That's a Dutch artist. Very tall, very strong, beautiful. Blonde hair, the most fantastic blue eyes, and this perfect physique. And the way he carried himself, the way he walked and talked and looked, and he was not only beautiful, extremely beautiful, but he was also very, very intelligent. And that's a good mixture. I remember that we had our first date in Düsseldorf. I still remember which dress I wore. Sorry. A very, very beautiful dress, I remember that. But not that much else, because we spent in a hotel in Düsseldorf. I was totally in love with this man, that's all I can say. And that was very romantic, yes.
Falling in love is exactly what Markus Wolf and the Stasi is counting on.
In the case studies of previous operations, it was apparent that the hook had to be fully set. There had to be a physical bond, there had to be sex between the pair, and there had to be an emotional attachment and connection. The Romeo became the outlet. So from the time they were targeted, once he was certain that they had access, that would become the most important person in the world.
Frank Dietzel came across as an extremely stable human being. He worked for the university as a chemistry professor. Also, he was a father figure. At that time, I was a very sad person, a very insecure person, and very, very, very depressive.
Just 3 months into their whirlwind love affair, Dietzel proposes marriage.
When he proposed to me in October of '77, I was totally surprised, because I never thought that such a man would ever consider marrying me. And then he told me a very intricate story. He told me that he was divorced, that he had a child from that marriage, that he worked for an international institution, something like the Green Party at that time in Germany, that this institute, worked all over the world, and that he had signed that contract for 5 years.
Dietzel goes on to explain that if they just wait another 4 years to marry, he'd avoid paying a heavy fine to get out of his contract. But there's another problem.
He had negotiated with his company, come to Germany 1 time per month to visit his child. And that now he was in a predicament because he had fallen in love with me. And that would mean that he would have to travel twice per month.
Dietzel comes up with a solution. His company will pay for his second visit to West Germany if Kleim agrees to do some work for them on the side.
I said, I do unofficially for a peace-promoting company. That doesn't make any sense to me. And then he told me that if I could give him documents. I said, the documents I translate don't mean anything to me. Then he said, if I would once take one of those papers with me, then the company, he would take it to the company and they could assess whether he could see me or not, with his travel arrangement. And so I brought him some crap which usually we throw away, in the waste paper. And then he said yes, and so that evolved.
Whether or not she understands it, Gabriella takes her first steps into the world of espionage.
The Romeo strategy is a long-term strategy. Once somebody passes a certain point of, call it no return, when the attachments are formed up over enough of a period of time, it's very hard to dislodge somebody from that kind of feeling.
Gabriella's job at the U.S. Embassy gives her access to confidential material.
I worked on the 4th floor, and I always took the stairs. And I always was nervous because I thought, what if I fall down the stairs? And I have all those stupid documents. And I took the documents home, and I had to photograph them. And Frank bought me a better camera than I had. And of course, he showed me how to take photos of the documents. He would always meet me on a Thursday evening, mostly in Remagen, along the Rhine. When we went to dinner, I gave him the role of films, but then he always said, thank you, and you did this very well, petting me like a child, and then he never said anything anymore. I don't know how much information I gave to him. I think, well, in films, sometimes 2 films, sometimes 4 films, it varied, sometimes none whatsoever. And I seriously, and I honestly, and I've always said this, I don't know what was on them because I never looked at it. I just took something. And yesterday I read all the documents from the trial. They always said something about flintlock. Now, please don't ask me what that is.
Flintlock are Special Forces military exercises, an important part of the overall defensive plan of Western Europe during the Cold War. These exercises still continue today.
In retrospect, I knew exactly that I was not allowed to take anything out of the embassy. I knew that. I was blinded by love, yes, blinded by love, by infatuation, by, blinded, punct, period, sorry.
Stasi could spare no effort whatsoever in making certain that these relationships continued as long as they were profitable from an intelligence standpoint. So they could find a church, they could find people who could pose as ministers, and they would conduct these sham marriage ceremonies. They would fill out the registry. These poor women believed that they were legally married to these people, but of course they were not. And what a shock it was to them. Can you imagine the dismay when they found out that they were not married, that this person had never really wanted to be married to her.
In 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down, followed by the reunification of Germany in 1990, and an end to Wolf's Romeo project.
After the reunification of Germany, he was coming to see me. And he looked totally different then, very much older, unrecognizably older, and was extremely sad. And I always wondered why he was so depressed and why he was so sad. And now, of course, I know, because his country was no longer existing. He didn't have any future at that time. But I don't know why he came to see me. Maybe as a human being, maybe he wanted to warn me. He could have, he should have told me, listen, you have to pack up and get out as soon as you can, immediately, today. But he didn't.
I also believe that any of these Romeos that kept up the relationship for years, let's say, is kidding himself if he thinks that he didn't actually form a real relationship with his target. Yes, he was doing it for these nefarious purposes, but human minds are complicated, and to actually make that work over time, you would have to have fallen in love to some degree with the other person. So, of course, at the end, it looks like it was a complete charade, but in my opinion, it would be not fully explicable that way.
In 1990, a Stasi defector provides a list of names of spies to the BKA. Kleim's name is on the list.
I was at work. I had a new job, a part-time job. And my boss came in and said, could you come with me? You have a visitor. And they told me that they are from the BKA, the Federal Police. And I thought, yes, well, yeah, what does that have to do with me? And then they said, well, do you know Frank Dietzel? I said, yes, of course I know him, but why do you ask me? And the next morning they took me, and there was brought towards the judge, and he charged me with espionage, and everybody walked around me and told me that I was a spy. And I thought, that's absolute idiotic.
It's only after Kleim's arrest that she finally learns the truth about her former fiancé.
I met him as Frank Dietzel, and I always called him Frank, but his real name is Dr. Rudolf Reck. He had been a professor in chemistry at the University of Rostock. And the day when I was arrested, the Federal Police also went to his house and placed him under arrest. He was married, actually, all of the time, and his wife subsequently left him because she didn't know anything about it, and they told me that his whole family didn't want anything to do with him anymore, and that he was at the end quite lonely.
What it shows is how committed these so-called Romeo agents were to their work. They were deceiving their families about everything they were doing to carry out a thoroughly unscrupulous task for the GDR regime in West Germany.
I never ever thought for just not even a split second that he would be East German or an East German spy. Never, ever. That was the farthest thing from my mind, really, seriously. I mean, I would have killed him. I would have seriously not only killed him, I would have... My father died in a Russian prisoner camp from starvation. You know, he was taken prisoner in April 23, just before the war ended, and died 4th of August. Seriously. No.
The Romeo strategy is a ruthless tactic. The ruthlessness comes from the point of view that you are damaging somebody's life so thoroughly and deeply that they may never recover from the hurt. And that's just a mean thing to do to another human being.